Hi, I'm Dawn with K-Squared Technologies. Welcome to our monthly webinar training series. In today's session, we'll look at how to use Microsoft Forms to gather data from surveys and quizzes. Our plan in this session is for you to first learn what the techniques are for creating a survey or a poll. And then how do we share that form? Working with Microsoft Forms, we're going to be collecting that data. And so how do we review those results? How can we easily take that information and be able to analyze it and make decisions from it? And we'll look at how to create a quiz using Microsoft Forms. And you'll also see how Microsoft Forms is integrated with other Microsoft 365 or Office applications like Teams and Outlook. To get started or to help us get a better sense of this before we go for our live demo on that, in Microsoft Forms, it's helpful to know that there are two basic choices, a form and a quiz. So kind of hang in there because it can be a little bit confusing. A form, it could be a survey or a poll that you use to survey your customers, your employees, your prospects. These forms can give you different ways to be able to ask various questions and gather the results. But a quiz is also a form. So quizzes are typically used in education or for testing knowledge from a training course. And in addition to all of the standard forms features, a quiz also includes options to indicate what the correct answers are, to track points on it, and to provide input to the responses. So we'll briefly look at how to create a quiz later on in this training session. It can also be helpful for you to know how to launch Microsoft Forms. So if you're brand new to working with Forms, the easiest way is to find it in the Microsoft 365 app launcher, what we typically call the waffle. So that's where you'll find that if you're logged into your office.com or Microsoft 365 login, you can find that in the upper left-hand corner in your apps. And if you don't see it in the initial list, just simply choose Explore All Your Apps, and you'll find Microsoft Forms there. Another way is for you to do it through the browser, forms.microsoft.com. And that's another way to do that. So it's going to be attached to your Microsoft 365 credentials. Now, when we're creating a form, we'll also have some various options for that, including copying from an existing form, creating one from a template. And there are a lot of really helpful templates in Microsoft Forms where it gives you a good start in terms of structure and gives you even ideas about what questions you might ask. Or you could build one from scratch, either a form or a quiz. So those are some of our options that we'll be exploring in our session today. Let's go ahead and explore that. So first, I'll move to my login here for Microsoft 365. And as I mentioned, one of our ways to be able to get into this is to move to our app launcher or the waffle in the upper left-hand corner. So from there, then I can choose Forms. And this will take me into the Forms environment. So from here, then at the top, you can see new form, new quiz, and also we have the opportunity to explore templates. Additionally, we're able to view other options such as what are my recent forms? Here I have my forms. So different options here, and we'll look at some of those examples in just a moment. We can look at forms that maybe have been shared from other people. And I could also favorite a form. So for instance, here I have one that is a quiz. If that was one that I wanted to favorite, let's come back here. If that's one I wanted to favorite, then I could move to the dot, dot, dot. And here I can see then, whenever we see dot, 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 that means there's more choices that typically will pop up a menu. And here I could favorite that one. And then if I move to my favorites, there I would see that. So we're going to look at some of these sample forms as we continue. One of those that we have here is just a really simple one so you can see the structure. And that is one that I've called here food trends. So if I open that up, what we're able to see are a couple things that are helpful to know when you're building a form. First of all, we can see how many responses we have, and that was also available in our main screen for forms. Additionally, we've created a title here and a description, and then also added an image. So we're able to add graphical support for this. And in this case, then we only have one question, but we could have multiple questions. And for this one, what are your favorite desserts? So we've also added an image that's associated with that particular question. This is an example of a choice survey or poll. And in this form, it's been set up to allow for multiple options. And you can see I'm looking at the structure of it versus what somebody would see when they're filling it out. So this also means that I have the ability to add additional options to it if I want to. But here, these are created options. Other is one of the options that we have if we wanted to build, create and gather other input. And as we explore and create a new form, I will show you more about these different choices. The nice thing that's also helpful here is that you will see that there's some artificial intelligence where we see suggested questions. We see some different options in terms of how this works for us. So this means that if we wanted to add some of these other questions, so it's just based upon the term food trends. But we might see some other ideas here, and maybe there's questions that we want to add to gather about the recipient and things along those lines. So the more content you build, then you're going to see maybe some more tailored options for you in the forms. So that's one of the other choices that we have here as well. Now for this one, I'm just going to close this particular window, but you can see as we start working with forms that will keep opening up a new tab in our browser. So I could also just navigate back here to forms if I wanted to see those choices. What we also see here is that there is another one. What do you think of teams? Now this particular one, we can see that we have 4 responses. But this was created actually in Microsoft Teams. So we can create polls in Outlook and in Teams and gather information. It's helpful to know that if we create a poll in Teams, it is limited to one question. Now that's going to change in the future, but right now we're limited to just one question there. And also, if we create that form or that survey, that poll in Teams, it is not something that we can delete there. It stays as part of the question. So it's a way to make sure that we have the integrity of the conversations and the activity that take place in Teams. We would be able to delete it here, but it will not remove it from Teams. So that can be helpful to know. And once again, our dot, 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 you can see the options where I could open it, favorite, and also delete it. But if I delete it here, it still stays in Teams. But that can be helpful for you. That is maybe having this displayed here just becomes more clutter than necessary. But by deleting it in the Forms app, doesn't mean that it will disappear from Teams. So that can be a helpful thing to keep in mind as well for that. So those are some different options that you have in working with that. But you easily can go to different views here as you navigate and work with that. What we're going to do is create a simple example. I'll show you what it looks like, just to give you an idea, and then you'll get a chance to see how these surveys or polls are built. So here's one that says example lunch choices. And this is one way that we could survey whatever it is. And notice that we can add an image to it. And it's only one question, but it could certainly have a lot more. So that's the option here, add new. So it simply has a few elements to it. So we have a background, we can add an image here. And so there are some different choices. So this is what we're going to build as an example. And then we'll build some more detailed ones as well, just to kind of get you started on building a form. Where we find these options then in the upper left-hand corner, here is new form, and that's where we'll start. Now we also could build one from a template, which I'll share with you a little bit later. To get started with this, I'll simply choose new form, and right now it's untitled. And with this then is, this might be team meeting, lunch options. Okay, so you can see how the artificial intelligence is kind of, as we provide more information here. So I put in my title, I have a description to it. Let's say that I want to make that look a little bit more interesting here. Here I could add media to it. So I could just actually drag an image in from a folder. I could paste it in. And so it could be an image or even a video. And I'm going to just upload it from a working area here. And let's say that I'll pick this option here for just adding a little flavor to it, if you will. Now, what are my options? What do I want to do or include in this? For this one, it's going to be very simple, and we'll do a more complex form as we continue. But I could have multiple choices where it could be one choice, multiple choices, different options. I could ask for text. I could build a question here that is asking for some ratings, a date selection, and there are others as well that I will share as we continue. But this one, I'll go ahead and pick this as a choice. And so for this, I'll say, where do you want to meet for lunch? Now, maybe it's actually going to be catered in. So there's different options that we could work with. And here, what I will do is I want to allow for multiple answers. So that way we can vote for that. And we'll add one more option here. Now, if I wanted to get additional input for this, I could also add an other. So that would be another choice here. So we also notice this. Let's say that I change this to back to multiple, turn off the multiple answers. Notice what this looks like. So we'll get the radial answers or the circles versus multiple answers. Now, when it's multiple answers, we could also determine is there any limit to how many choices they can make? For this one, we won't, but we could put in a particular number. And we could continue adding options if we want to, we also would even have the option to add additional images to each one of these if we'd like to, or even associated with this question. So different options, and we could, if we wanted to, we could copy a question if we wanted to have something similar to it within that, and you even have the options to move them up and down and delete them as necessary. Additionally, notice and pay attention as you're planning out your forms, which questions might be required, and otherwise they would be options. So if it was required, and in this case, it's the only thing that we would have here, but I won't make it required for this, then it will not let them continue in that form until it's filled out. They won't be able to submit it until it's filled out. We could also gather, if we wanted to, other information like their name and other data here. So you can see that there's some suggestions in terms of working with it. Now, a lot of these really aren't relevant to it, so it just always depends upon what kind of words you put in terms of whether or not it's going to be offering you suggestions that are useful. So I could also add some different things to this, but let's go ahead then and look at a few choices for how we can improve the look of this. First, I want to preview this. And then you get a sense of what will this look like as I'm working with it. So this is the structure or the layout that we currently have. And we can also test this on mobile. And that may mean that you might make some adjustments based upon maybe it looks a little bit busier on mobile or other things. So here I'll go ahead and choose back. The other option here is style. So with style, one of these can be helpful because we have artificial intelligence that's just trying to come up with maybe some suggestions and some things that might make sense in terms of how it looks, and if there's color that we want to add to it, or other choices there too. So we may not see anything that's relevant for that, but let's just say that I wanted to pick this one. Or I could select other options that might be appropriate. Maybe I don't want to have an image for that. I just want something that's pretty straightforward, but will maybe perhaps add a background color to it, something that's a little different. And you can see how we have additional AI choices for that. So we could change this. And maybe I want, so we just kind of decide what are the different options for us, what makes sense as it works through it. So that's what we have under our style piece there. So once again, we can preview it and come back. So, and we could certainly go into view all for different colors. So you can see how this gets pretty involved in terms of how you could structure it. So, but it gives you some interesting things to explore. I think I'll go back to what we had before here and just make that orange. So that way I have my image. So that is the idea of creating this form. Now, because it's one of the Microsoft 365 apps, it's just saving it. We can see that up at the top here. We don't have to do a save as. It's just being saved as part of that environment. And so that is one of the options that we have for this. And what if we are ready to share this? Well, one of the things that can be helpful to know is how we would collect that. So we're over here at the top here. We looked at preview and style. Let's look at collect responses. Here you can then control who can answer. So is it only people internally in your organization? Do you want to limit how many responses we might get from them? Could it be anyone? Because it depends upon the point and purpose of the survey, right? One of our ways that we could share it is certainly if it's within internally is we might just copy that link. And this is something we could put in an email. This is something we could drop into a Teams channel. We would have that option. We could also create an invitation. And so this is where we could have this be then once again, either in Teams or in Outlook email. So it just structures it a little bit differently. And then we have this content so we could always modify this. Maybe we need to have a response that's a little bit sooner than that. So that would be another way that we could do that. And we could then mention a particular channel and send it through Teams or send it through Outlook. So different options there, especially if this was stay as an internal option. We could create a QR code for this if it made sense. So this might be something that might be more applicable to someone that is public facing, where your retail or restaurant, or you have a customer interface where you want to be able to make it easy for them to respond to various questions. Perhaps you want to make the code available or provide a link to this form on your website. That's where we would then come up with this code that then could be embedded into a web page. So these are all different possibilities in terms of how we would share this form. So for this one, I'll go ahead and close this, but you can kind of see the idea of how this looks. I'll preview it once again, and you can see that I could make these options and then submit it. Okay, but since I'm the creator of it, that might not make a lot of sense for me to submit for myself, but I could. And that's one simple example of a form or poll survey that we have in Microsoft Forms. We're going to go ahead and build something a little bit more involved with this. But let's look then at, maybe you don't want to have to do it right from scratch. Perhaps it would make more sense or be more helpful for you to do a template. So as an example here, notice this form here, IT device request form for remote work. That comes from a template. And so this certainly could be modified. One of the things that's also helpful here is that when you have a form with multiple questions, you will see forms will tell you how long it will take. And this can be, this is a good thing to include. You probably found yourself in a situation where you thought it was just a really quick survey or form, and then you kept having more and more and more questions, and you really didn't get the correct communication for this. So this becomes then a way for us to be able to more easily say this will take 5 minutes. It may even not even take that long, but you can see some options. And so here we can see the questions with it. What are the different devices and other specifications? And you can see those choices. So that is from a template. And that gives you another option for it. All right. Now, to build something like this from a template, in the upper right-hand corner, we choose Explore Templates. And here we will see some different choices, and we'll view all. So you can see here that there are some that are trending, maybe in terms of a little bit more commonly used, but you can also explore by categories, because there's can be so dependent upon whether it's an internal form for employees, you're gathering research, you want to be able to put together an event. Maybe it has to do with your workflow, like office facility request form, things like that. So you can see these various options that are available, and expect that this will grow as well. But these are just some different suggestions that you could build off of. and to consider. So um, look at this as one possibility. Know that all the content can be modified, whether it's the image in the background, it's the color, it's the questions, but it might be useful to create a framework for you in working with that. So we'll go ahead and go back. So those are always good to look for, where you can move backwards instead of, for instance, creating or opening up another window. Another example that we have that came from a template is this English grammar test. So this is a quiz. And where that's a little different here, you can see that once again, it's giving us an idea here about, and we would have the option, there's an option in a quiz to add a timer for it. It's going to take approximately 5 minutes. The asterisk is anything that's required. And notice what we're seeing. We're seeing the behind the scenes here. And so this is quizzing on grammar in terms of which is correct. And you actually will flag when you're building a quiz what the correct answers are and how many points are associated with that. And so that's a little different with a quiz, where you're putting values on it and tracking as well. We can additionally add comments to a correct answer to provide a little bit more explanation. You'll see that as we continue. So this is a different example here, one that is working with a quiz, which not as common an application in forms, but certainly an option, and we'll explore that in more detail as well. Let's dig in, and I'll share with you how you can build a survey that utilizes some of the different kinds of question choices or options, the different kinds of form fields that are available to you. And for this, then, we're going to build a new form. We'll go up to the top here. And by the way, I can always hide the templates. If you're really not using those, then we can close that component here. And we'll build a new form. To start, what we want to do is gather information from a training course that the participants were part of, a Microsoft Excel class, for instance. So I'm just going to get this thing. Okay, that's my title. And you can see we're getting this kind of suggestion, the prompting for our, based upon typing here. I can just simply tab to make that a little bit faster. And I can build this into my description and edit. Now, I don't know how long this will take, but I can then add this information or edit it. So let's just say that I think it's going to take 5 minutes. If I get other input from this form, I can edit that. But then this is giving us a little bit more information. For this entire form, then I'll add an image. Once again, come in and I'll bring that in. I'll bring in the Excel logo for that, but it could be something else. I could even drag that one in as well. And what we have here for this is we're going to walk through this and make some different options for this. And what you'll see is that ultimately we're going to build in multiple sections to make the questions a little bit less. There won't be so much scrolling for that. And it's helpful to kind of plan out what the order is. You can always move things around. So that certainly is an option for you, but plan out, what do I want to ask? What kind of information will be helpful? How do I structure it? Is it better to provide choices or do I want it to be an open-ended text question? Which of these questions are required? And so here you can see that we uh, have some different possibilities that we could add right away. Okay, so that would be one possibility. And let's say that we have added this, how likely are you to recommend this training or workshop to a friend or colleague? I could add that one right away. So that is one, and I've just selected that one, and notice you could see that I could select others in terms of uh, working with that. Okay. How would you rate your Excel skills? Well, I'll show you how to build that run rather than picking from the list. But in this case, I'll just pick this one and add selected. So that was my first one that I might have. Now maybe I want to structure that a little bit differently. So we're going to see that there might be a different way to structure that, or that we might decide that we want to remove that. But let's go ahead and now add another one. So this is going to be another question. And we're going to use something called Net Promoter Score. So it can get a little confusing because the results really aren't helpful for us in terms of how it labels things. But you probably have seen these. So here I'll pick this. And the question is not about how likely are you to recommend us to a friend or colleague, although that might be an easier way or a different way to express this question. Instead, what we'll do for this is how would you rate your Excel skills? So a couple things here. I want to make that required. And I want the answer on the left-hand side to be beginner. On the right hand, and maybe I call it expert or Excel superstar, whatever you want for that. So for this, it's providing a scale here of 0 to 10, and that becomes a question that we can ask. So that would be one of our options. Now you can see that we can move these up or down. And I might decide, for instance, that maybe it's easier for me to express this a little differently, but right now we'll keep it here as a choice. But I have another one that I want to make, and this is going to be a choice. So I'll pick this. And with this, though, this is going to be, maybe I want to gather some information about where someone's located. So for this, instead of having it be multiple choices, I don't want to list all the possible states and things like that. I'll show you how this works. First of all, I'll go to the ... and I'll make this into a drop down. Now, why that's helpful is that then what happens is that we don't see all 50 states in the United States there. We're going to see a drop down where we can pick it. Now, how can we make this easier? Well, I'm going to paste in those choices. So let me go pop in over to Excel. I'll select this. I'll move to the first state in the list, hold Shift and Control down. I've selected all of those options. Control C for copy. And we'll move over here and Control V for paste. And so now I've created a drop down that lists all of those options. Now, you may want to narrow it down to other options. You may want to have another option that is outside of the United States, whatever that might be. But this is another choice for you in terms of working with it. So let's preview it for just a moment. So far, this is what we have. And this way, I want you to see how that drop down works. That's primarily because the other ones are a little bit more obvious. We'll go back and let's continue working with this. Okay, now what we want to do is add another question to gather when they took the class. And for that, if it was legitimately for an Excel training class, we'd probably have specific choices, or we might just send it out at the conclusion of a particular class and we would already know that. But for this, I'll pick a date. So that just so you can see how a date works. Okay. So we're also saying I don't need to, maybe I won't make this required, but it'll simply be a date. And currently this is our format. So I'll change that to not being required. And let me just address here, we won't look at it specifically today, but in Microsoft Forms, we have something called branching. And what branching means is, and you've probably seen this in different surveys, if you answer something, let's say if you say yes, it might take you to a different question to continue. Or if you say no, it might skip the next two questions because they're not applicable if your answer is no. That's the idea of branching, where you can kind of build a more personalized experience for people. So this wouldn't really matter in that case, but there might be situations where you have specific answers in working with it. Now, because I had the question about where you're located, now we have some questions relating our location, but it really doesn't have anything to do with what we're trying to gather for this. Let's look at adding another one. In this dropdown, here we're going to pick what we can call it a Likert or Likert. And so with this is a way for us to kind of get a scale or of different choices. So let's see what this looks like. So this is, how often do you use the following spelling counts? Okay, so how often do you use them? So it automatically is going to include or give you what would be different options like daily, weekly, and so on. Now you could customize these options, but instead we'll go ahead and add them all. Now we don't need seasonal, so I'll select that and delete it. But these would be different options that we could put in so that it provides us once again a little bit more intel. And let's continue adding some statements for this. I'll add a few more. And simply populate it with whatever options would make sense or would be helpful, because how are you going to use the information? What will you do with it? Is it relevant or useful information? So that is another option for us. Now here we have the, as part of our structure here, we might take this one here. How likely are you to recommend this? And realize that maybe we shouldn't put that right up front because we really want to get more information first of all. So I'm simply going to take that, look at this, where we have this as kind of handle, and I can drag this and notice how it renumbers. So I'm just moving it down to what might be a more appropriate place in terms of asking my questions. Okay, so I got information about their skills and when did they take it. Now we want to find out a little bit more. Maybe I want to actually move this here. I move it down below this one. That makes more sense. Okay, So now, how likely are you to recommend? Let's look at adding another one. So we'll add another question. And in this case, this will be a rating. Okay, so the rating is overall, are you with this training? Okay. And we can decide how many levels and how you'd like to describe it. What indicators do you want to have? But we'll keep this as 5-star and working with it. Okay. So that is then our option. Oh, all right. Think about everything in the order that I want, but you can see the flexibility of how easily you can add these. So we'll just put in one more in working with it, and this is going to be text. And the question is, what Microsoft training classes would you like to see offered in the future? Okay. And here we'll make this into a long answer. That gives them more options in terms of how they might populate this or fill it in. So this is the idea of the form that we have. And you can see that it's a lot more than just multiple choice questions. And you can also, now these questions, recommended or suggested questions, now these are starting to get a little bit more tailored because it's picking up on the word training and understanding a little bit more. So they're a little bit more helpful or might be a little bit more appropriate. So now notice how where we see this kind of lightning bolt, this is where we're getting some AI prompts. And so I could turn on the option for them to be able to save the responses and edit the responses. So those are some settings, and we'll dig into some of the settings a little bit more. But we saw a little bit here where it was who could respond. Well, this might be anyone can respond. And do I want it to be anonymous? Or because in this case, I'll keep it anonymous because I don't want it, it's not company specific. For those options and settings, we also have the ability to decide if we have some time frames on this for the questions, and we'll do a little bit more with that as we continue. So let's go ahead and look at our form. I think we've done a great job so far. What else could we do? Well, we kind of built out these different possibilities in terms of working with it and move some things around and, have that option here. I mentioned before that one choice was we could do branching, and we also, move here. We also have the ability or option in some of our questions to maybe to allow for uploading a file as well. So there's some different options too. Notice that we could delete, we can copy. So the more you have it planned out, certainly the easier it is to work with it. But as we click on each one of these, then you can see that it will provide us with those choices. Earlier, I mentioned that sections make it a little bit easier for you to divide up a form. And that's what we'll go ahead and do. So let's move here. We've gathered information about the user's background, and let's go ahead. Actually, I won't come to this fourth one here because I want to add a section. Here we go. So below this one, I'll add a section. So this section then is going to be, and we can add it for others as well. So the idea is maybe tell us about your experience. There you go. So that's our section. And so what happens there is that we have the how likely are you to do that? How satisfied are you? What training classes would you like to see? But if we move to the top here, then we've also have our first section. So this first section might be something where we want to have, we'll call this software skills. And so we can just simply describe this. So that's the idea of sections. It helps to organize these things a little bit. And let's look at preview just so that you get a sense of what that looks like. So here's the section. Here's the description of that section. And we can see the drop down, we can see the options, and then here's the next. Yeah, and notice here, 2 questions need to be completed before going to the next page because we set those to be required. So that's the idea of our sections. And we'll go through and look at how we could complete them in a little bit later, but let's look at a couple other possibilities here. So first we have our style here. This might be one way for us to be able to maybe customize how we structure this. And let's say that we don't really need to have anything really fancy here, but since I have this Excel logo, I like to have a color that more closely matches that. And so I happen to know that what the color is for this. So I'll click on a plus and I'll simply, so here we could upload an image. There might be something that makes sense to related to Excel, but here I'll just put in the hex color that matches that logo. And so now that I've created it, I go back and it's now one of the choices to create a customized theme. And so notice how this has changed it. Okay. So different possibilities in working with it. And we could continue building off of those kinds of templates as well. So that's a little bit more of the customization. Let's look at other settings that will be helpful for you in working with this kind of form. In the upper right-hand corner, ... This is where we can explore. We could print out the form, for instance, but here I'll explore settings. Once again, we saw those earlier just a moment ago, like who can respond? Do we have constraints on the time frame for that? And the time duration might be so this would be if you had a timer for more likely for a quiz, things like that. Do I want to have I'll customize the thank you note for this one. And thank you for your feedback. Probably would come up with something a little bit more personal than that, but that's the idea of what we can. And here they can edit their response. And even we could get email notifications if we wanted to as well for that. So those are under the settings in terms of working with it. Okay. So that is and once again, we can preview, see what this looks like. So if I was coming through here, I could come in and just pick from and say, you can just kind of test this out, you can pick a date, Maybe I took it last Thursday. Which applications do you use? So you can see here the next, that's the section. That's how it divides it up. Okay. And then I could submit it. So I'm really just testing this out, but that's the general idea in terms of how that works. So hopefully that gives you some options in understanding how we can build a form or a survey. So I'll share with you briefly how we can look at those kinds of responses, and then we'll wrap up with a quick look at building a simple quiz. And we'll then, I'll just touch on how we can work with Outlook and Teams. So let's go back to our forms. And we created this wonderful, super fantastic form. I'll refresh and we can see we have a lot more options because we built some more. But here's one. Here's basically that same form that we've already sent out to get answers. And so one of the things, well, actually on what you see here, we've got 7 responses here. So we've got our feedback and we may have decided, okay, we've got the information that we need. It might be something that's ongoing as well. It all depends upon how you're utilizing it. Is it a one-off, or maybe it's just for one class and you give people a certain amount of time? Or maybe it's something that is more like a customer survey type of a situation where you continue to gather that. So we can see the questions, but I want to view those responses because this is really helpful to be able to see how many we got. And when I mentioned that net promoter score, that's why I said these answers really aren't that helpful for you because it has to, they're trying to gather then more so. So notice how they're assigning that. So the terminology isn't really helpful. We're more interested in what the score is. This is how they rated it. So you can kind of disregard that information, but we can also find out where people were located and get a chart for that. We can also find out when did they take the training course, and we can get more details about that. We can see that information. And then here we see a charting in terms of applications that they might use and what that frequency is. And so you can see here, we did really well. Everyone gave us a 5-star rating. And we can see that we have different responses here as well. And so this is where we can view each one of those individually. But what's really helpful is at the top here, we can also open up in Excel. Okay, so here I'm going to open up the file. Let's see if it'll open up without any issues. I might have to go into the folder. There we go. So I'll go ahead and open up the downloads, and we can see here that now we have data that we can process maybe in a pivot table, or that we can sort and filter, especially if we were getting, if we had hundreds of responses, then we could really get a sense of what was most important and useful. So this is why it's really helpful to plan out what it is you want to ask about and what are you going to do with those results. So you can see here, when do they take the exam? What's their use of these different applications? Likely to recommend. And, like, for instance, how likely are you to, well, we might want to, have another question to ask in this, more about, like, why did you make that choice, or what, please share more about your selection, things like along those lines. And then we can get feedback for what we might have as upcoming classes. So that's all really useful information for us in working with those. And that is our gathering that for a survey or a poll. But what if we wanted to do a quiz? So we'll look at the quiz. I'll touch briefly on Teams and Outlook, and then we'll be wrapped up for the day. So with this, I'll move back to Forms. And I do already have a sample quiz for you, but let's see how we could build that. I'll choose New Quiz at the top. This is one of our ways to build a new one. And for this, let's say that we wanted to test people on their knowledge about Excel instead. And so the name, it's helpful if you use the term, for instance, quiz in there, just to keep it separate in your mind and organizing it versus a survey. Okay. Now we could add an image here. Once again, we saw how we would be able to do that. Maybe I bring in an image related to working with Excel. And now I'll add a new option. So with this, then let's say I have choices here. I want to add choice. And the question is, how many functions are available in Excel? And there's only one option allowed, or there might be multiple choices, but they can't have multiple answers for that. And so for this, I will say 256, 312, 481, and 523. So the first thing that I want to do is indicate that this is what I'm saying is the correct answer. And then additionally, I'll add to that is a little message for people who choose this to say this number changes with updates, currently more than 480. Okay. So that's where we can kind of get a sense. And that's what's different with a quiz. How many points would I associate it with? I'll just say 5 for this and add new. So for this adding new, this will be multiple choices. You can see how the Forms is trying to find ways to be helpful here. And I'm going to add, first of all, I'll say multiple answers here and slicer, auto filter, and then I want to say add in all of the above. Okay, so this is correct, this is correct, this is correct. So you can see that if they, based upon their answers, and here I'll do 5 points for that one. And that's the idea with a quiz. So you can get an idea then, in terms of how this works. It's a very simple quiz. Let's go ahead and look at a preview. This is what it might look like. And so if someone picks this, then that's not going to be correct. But if they pick this, then they would get that comment or work thing. You can see I can edit this and working with it. So if I pick this, and maybe I pick this one that I know is correct, and I'll do all of the above and I submit it. So it says it's completed. I only got 5 out of that. So I'm going to review the results. So it's showing me that this was correct. And this is which of the following, this is incorrect. Okay, so it's showing me what would be correct. That's the idea of working with a quiz. And once again, if we had that quiz, then we would have the same options in terms of how we share a copy, reviewed results, etc. So that's Those are all available to us, but the distinction is in terms of how a quiz behaves, in terms of tracking information, and it only does not let you edit responses, let's say after the fact. So if I went into this and went into my settings, it behaves just a little bit different here. I could put it into practice mode. I could show results automatically. Who can fill it out? What are some different options here? And you can see that as well. And we could further customize the style and otherwise work with it. As we wrap up, let's look briefly then at two different options for us with our applications. That is, first, let's move to Outlook. If we're in Outlook, this is just real quickly as you're in a new email. Let's say at some point you wanted to add a question. Well, I could craft the email and ask people to fill it out. And with this, then, for instance, I simply choose Insert, Poll, and it will launch Microsoft Forms. So you may have done this without realizing that Microsoft Forms was behind this. And we would put in some of those answers that we have, just like we saw before. Another option. Whoa. And allow for multiple answers. So it's a little bit simpler. We only get one question with that, but then we could choose next and we could vote for that. So one of the things in this case, if I add it to the email, then I can kind of phrase this in terms of how I want to work with it. Not sure why it didn't add, but it does. And when they fill it out, then what will happen is I would see an answer that somebody had completed that particular question. So that would be one way for me to do that. Now, if I'm in Teams, let's go ahead and look at Teams. There we go. So if I'm in Teams, it's a similar idea. So here's a form that was created in a Teams channel. What do you think of Teams? It's amazing. Teams helps me save so much time. I can see the options here. And let's look briefly at how this would be created. So I can simply be in one of my channels. I start a post. And with that, then at the bottom here, we'll click on a plus. Now, if Forms has been used recently in Teams, you will see it here. Otherwise, you can search for Forms. So we just simply launch Forms. And we could put in our questions. Whatever we're looking for as options. And you can see we could have multiple questions for that as well. That's the idea. We preview it and then we can send. So now it shows up in our channel. And what's helpful here is I can put in a reply and I might say at team, please respond to the survey above. And I could send it out as well. But by doing an app mention, then it's more likely that people will see it. So that's the idea that we have in terms of working with it in Teams. PowerPoint has a little bit of a poll option, and Excel does as well, but we're most likely to do that in a communication channel like Teams or possibly working with Outlook. All right. I hope that that's been helpful for you to get an idea of how forms can help support you in your workplace. And it's part of our Microsoft 365 applications. And so it's right there for us. You just may not have had the opportunity to work with it before. This course is part of our ongoing webinar series that K Squared Technologies offers once a month on the second Tuesday of each month. So coming up, we'll also have an exploration of working with Microsoft Word, Excel charts and graphics, and then we'll start a two-part series on Microsoft Teams tips and techniques. So that's what we've got in our upcoming schedule. And look for our uh, email communications for you to register for those courses. I thank you for joining us. This has been our look at Microsoft Forms and tips and shortcuts to really make it easier for you to be able to create those surveys and quizzes to be able to get the data and the information that's helpful for you to be successful. Let us know how we can help you to be more productive. Please reach out to K-Square Technologies so that we can support you with your IT services and Microsoft technology and consulting. That is, we're here to help make things easier and for your workplace to be able to run more smoothly. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day. Hope to see you next month.